Tony Wagner, author of The Global Achievement Gap, outlines the ways in which, as a nation, we have fallen behind in preparing our young people for leadership and for the business world and for competing against everybody else in the world. Now, more than ever, it is important to understand what those essential skills are that our kids tend to be lacking in and how we can fill that gap by preparing them for the future. One of my favorite books in the past, 5 or 6 years has been Marching Off the Gap by Tim Elmore and his team of experts and researchers. And one of the things that they address is the fact that as an educational system, we have focused on the wrong things. And in preparing them academically and making sure that they are ready to pass the assessments and to get the grades and get into the colleges, we have failed to actually prepare our children for life. These recent times have forced all of us to take a closer look at what it is that we're doing and how we're doing it. We know that the world has shifted, and regardless of what happens this year with the coronavirus, as I am filming this is 2021, the beginning of 2021, and we have just spent the greater half or the greater part of 2020 battling with isolation and social distancing and trying to figure out how to face this coronavirus that became this amazing pandemic that forced all of us to slow down, stop, and take a closer look at what we're doing. And as we have entered into 2021, we have understood that regardless of what happens with vaccine, with the pandemic, with the virus, the world has slightly shifted, or actually tremendously shifted, in ways that will never go back exactly to the way they were before the pandemic. So I think that today more than ever, it is extremely important for us as parent leaders to stop and consider what are those skills that, unfortunately, for whatever reason, and I've talked about my view and my take on the educational system in other videos, so this is not the space for that. But regardless of that part of it, there are these skills in which our kids are lacking and which we need to somehow make up for as parent leaders, right? So what I would love to do today is go through the 7 skill sets. They are actually arranged in pairs, but the 7 skill sets that Tony Wagner and Tim Elmore and other experts outline as essential skills for today's day and age, so that our kids are ready to not just compete in the business world, but so they are ready to face whatever the world might look like tomorrow. I have this amazing group of nieces and nephews, 9 of them altogether, not including obviously my 2 own kids, my 2 daughters. And they are amazing in their own ways, and they each have this special area of uniqueness and ability that makes them stand out from all the rest. But there's this one in particular that has always been extremely bright. He gets amazing grades. He doesn't really even have to study. He just has this unique, almost innate ability to retain and process information, right? So he's always done really well in school. Now, the problem comes when we step outside of what is required to do well in school. So my sister often complains about how this extremely bright, talented young man doesn't really take ownership of some of the things that he needs to do. So for example, when it came for time to do the course selection in college, my sister had to be on him all the time. Like, did you do this? Did you try that? And what she complained about the most was that he would try one thing. And if that one thing didn't work, then he would just give up. And suddenly it was just something that he couldn't do and he needed help with. And I started talking to her about it, and we came to this conclusion that I have come to in a long time, and I helped her understand that part of the problem is that our kids are not being prepared in critical thinking and problem-solving skills. So where does that come from, and what does that look like? If you think about the way our kids are instructed in school, you will notice that there's this trend in which there is a right and wrong answer, which I can kind of understand, especially in math and science, right? But our kids are told, okay, you're going to take down these set of notes, or you're going to listen to the teacher. And somewhere in the notes or the book or the teacher lecture, you're going to get the right answer. Then what you're going to do is you're going to take that right answer, you're going to memorize it or somehow learn it, and then you're going to spew that right answer onto the test, and then ta-da, you're successful. Look at that. So in doing that, what we have eliminated is this ability to develop critical thinking and problem solving, right? And I know that in the educational system, there's a lot that's being done to try to promote this again, to try to build this sense of go beyond just the obvious, of thinking outside of the box a little bit. But the reality of it is that most of our kids are bright enough to understand that if they just wait it out long enough, somebody's going to give them the right answer. And it's either right or wrong. There's no gray area. So our kids are taught inadvertently and not directly, right, by well-intentioned teachers who are trying their best with what they're given. But they are taught that there is one way to answer a question. There's one way to solve a problem. And if they can't figure out that right answer right away, if they can't figure out the right way to solve the problem so that it fits what is expected of them, then what's the point? They can't get the right answer. It's impossible. So we need to, in our roles as parent leaders, put our kids in situations where they have to think beyond the right or the wrong, where we allow for them to make some mistakes and for them to think through, okay, why didn't this work and how can I try this in a different way? What other approach can I take so that maybe I get to my end result? We need to start shifting from just putting them in a position where this is the right answer to thinking, okay, that could be one answer. And it could work. What other options do we have? What other things can we look at? What other ways can we come up with that we would end up in the same end result, but maybe approaching it from different perspectives depending on whatever the circumstances might be, right? So we need to teach them to analyze and think critically, think beyond, okay, what is the right answer to what is the right question that I need to be asking myself so that I can still get to the end result, right? Because it's not about coming up with the correct answer. It's about taking yourself through the right steps to get to the right destination, right? And it won't always look like this. In fact, it seldom will. It will often look like a zigzag, right? A tremendous topsy-turvy, loopy type of journey, and they need to be okay with that. As a teacher, I often encountered that when I tried to put my kids in collaborative learning groups or tried to get them to do any kind of teamwork, they were very resistant to it. Most of them had one of two concerns. Either nobody's going to do what they need to do and I'm going to end up doing all of the work, or is my grade going to depend on what everybody else does, right? So that comes from a very long-standing line of experiences in which they are put in groups, but they are not taught how to effectively collaborate, which brings me to that second essential skill, which is collaboration and leadership. See, here's the thing. Most of the times we put kids in teams, whether it be in sports, in arts, or in school, right? Collaborative learning groups or teamwork or whatever you might want to call it. And we tell them, all right, you need to complete this assignment, you need to do this work, you need to end at this result. But we never guide them through understanding, okay, how do we organize and prioritize this work? How do we figure out what the strengths of each team member is, right? What the strength of each team member is, so that we can maximize all the strengths in the group? How do we decide who is best suited to be the leader of the group? Because what tends to happen is that usually one person takes the reign and says, okay, this is what needs to get done. But when the other people don't respond, that one person ends up doing the bulk of the work. And that's not leadership, right? That is just taking on control. And that's something completely different. So we need to not just say, okay, you're going to work in teams, but teach them. How do we understand and how do we uncover what the strengths of each person in the group are? How do we uncover who is best suited to be the leader in this particular situation, right? Because in sports, it might be one person. In art, it might be another person. If it's something academic, depending on the subject, it might be a different person. So we need to teach them, how do we understand what collaboration really is, which means, okay, we're all going to do our part to work together to get to the same result. And that can look a million different ways, and it can change and alter depending on what the final task is that needs to be completed. But somewhere along the line, someone needs to take responsibility for teaching our kids, what does that look like? How do we accomplish it? How do we get from point A to point B in a team, in a group, without just one person shouldering all of the responsibility? So let's start thinking within our own home. How do we model that part? How do we model the fact that, okay, we're all one team and we have one end result. Let's say that our end result this week is to get the house completely clean, right? Maybe we're just taking down our Christmas or holiday decorations and we want to make sure that the house is clean and everything is put away. But how do we accomplish that as a team without being the responsibility of just one person or without one person shouldering everything? So if it's something about organization and cleaning, who is best suited to be the leader? Who knows everything that needs to be done and how to best delegate it and make sure that everybody has a job and a job that they can do well? Maybe in this instance is mom, maybe in this instance is dad, maybe it's big sister or big brother or little sister or little brother, right? But you need to be willing and able to model and demonstrate that it's not always going to be you who needs to take charge, right? So maybe for this particular task in my family, I would say big sister is the best suited to be the leader, right? So maybe we give her the opportunity to say, okay, honey, what needs to be done? What's the order? And I know in my household, my oldest daughter would have a checklist. Okay, this needs to be done, and this needs to be done, and this needs to be done, and this needs to be done, right? And then we need to have this conversation. Okay, if these are the tasks that need to be completed, and you're in charge, who do you think is best suited to do each of these and why? So maybe little sister, who is very meticulous and very artistic, is best suited to take and organize things color-coded or to make things look pretty in a certain space, right? Maybe dad, who is very systematic, is best at taking that and, well, while you do this, I take it out and, I don't know, organizing the tasks so that they flow, right? So thinking about each individual person and their strengths, how are we going to accomplish this task? And model what collaboration and leadership looks like when you approach it from a strengths-based perspective. Number 3 in our list of essential skills is agility and adaptability. When I was 15, I laid out this plan of what my entire life was going to look like based on the fact that I just knew I wanted to be a neurosurgeon. So I knew I had 16 years of college ahead of me. I knew the steps that I needed to take to get there. And I knew exactly what I wanted to do during each of those stages and each of those steps. Well, lo and behold, first year in college, I realized I wasn't cut out to be a doctor. And that's a story for a different time, right? Suddenly, I felt like the rug was pulled out from under me. I felt like I was floundering. I had no direction. I had no idea what I wanted to do next because I had no adaptability skills. I was very rigid. I was very set in the way things needed to be done. And the reality of it is that our system, our school system, is not designed to promote agility and adaptability. What it is designed to promote is conformity and rigidity. So you come in when the bell rings and you sit, usually in rows, especially now, and you stay in that same seat for for the rest of the year unless the teacher tells you otherwise. And you have this routine in the classroom, a bell ringer, and then you do this, and then you do that. Nothing wrong with routines. Kids need routines, right? That's something for a different time. But what happens if all of a sudden that routine is broken? What happens if all of a sudden something is different? Our kids are thrown for a loop. They don't know what to do with themselves when anything is shifted, right? There's this classic book, Who Moved My Cheese? And we are actually programmed to kind of think that way, right? If this is the route to the cheese, then that's the route I'm going to take every single time, and I'm going to get to that cheese. And if somebody moves the cheese, then suddenly my world collapsed, right? So we need to start teaching kids, look, things are not always going to go to plan. So what do? How do we think on our feet when suddenly what we expected to be here, right in front of us, is 3 steps away? Or how do we manage when we expect it to be at a certain level and then we're not? I mean, think about your own life. What is the main cause of most of your own stress and your own feelings of inadequacy, or your own feelings of not being far enough in life, or whatever kind of negative emotions you have concerning your journey and where you're at in life? Most of them come from that lack of agility and adaptability, from thinking that things have to be a certain way, otherwise they're not working. So if we start to teach our kids a little flexibility, a little thinking on their feet, right? Like maybe I can't find my favorite shoes. Where did you look? Where else could they be? Let's think about this for a minute. And if you can't find them, what other shoes could you wear? How else can you make this work? How else can you make this happen? Does it always have to be perfect? How can we manage with good enough for now, knowing that we can work to perfect it? How do we move beyond this rigid thinking of it has to be done this way, it has to be done now, and it has to work perfectly? And how do we move into a space of more flexibility so that they can learn to adapt when they need to, be agile in their thinking on how to modify things when it's necessary, and know the difference between perseverance and adaptability, right? So it's not that I'm going to give up. It's how do I fix things so that I can still get there, but adapting to this new set of circumstances. So number 4 is initiative and entrepreneurialism. A lot of people think entrepreneurialism is just about starting a business, right? You're an entrepreneur when you start your own business. And that's not always true. You can be an entrepreneur within a job. You can be employed and still be an entrepreneur, because entrepreneurialism has more to do with that innovative thinking, right? With figuring out what needs to be done in order to fix something, in order to correct a problem, in order to make things more effective and function better. And then initiative is taking that action without being told that you need to take it, right? So understanding that if this needs to be fixed and I recognize that this is the way to fix it, then I'm going to go ahead and do what needs to be done, right? The problem is that somewhere along the line we have started to confuse initiative with disrespect. So if our kids take on certain initiatives without asking permission, the teacher might yell at them because they're out of their seat or they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. If our own kids in our home take initiative to do things slightly different or move things around, or they're being disrespectful because they didn't ask permission to do whatever X, Y, or Z. But what are areas in which we can start giving our kids a little bit more space to take that initiative? What are areas in which we can give them carte blanche and just give them open permission to look at things differently? And if you see a better way to do them, go ahead and get them done. Can we maybe give them space to not clean the room the way we think it should be cleaned, as long as it gets done? Can we maybe give them space to not necessarily do things when and where we ask them to, as long as it gets done in an effective manner? Can we maybe have more open conversations about how do you think is the best way that we can approach X, Y, or C situation, right? So open up the space for conversation and for interaction about what are some ways in which they can step away from just the right answer, or the way things have always been done, or the way we have done things in the past, and start thinking about, how can I make this more effective? How can we shift this in a way that is more productive and that solves the problem in a new way? The next skill is my favorite, and it's effective oral and written communication. I am not an English nerd. I have a master's degree in literature. I have taught composition and English and writing and all these things for many, many, many years. And I absolutely love the creative process when it comes to delivering information and producing content, whether it is oral or written or whatever mode you might want to use. So that's why the podcast and the YouTube channel and all these things. But one of the things that I have noticed is that even though there's a huge emphasis on writing and on reading in the schools, our kids are not truly effective at communicating, whether it be orally or in written form. And I started to wonder why. Why is it that even though we put such emphasis on doing well in writing assessments and on reading across the curriculum, right? So you have now reading and writing in math and science and social studies and in all of the subjects, even in the electives, and we still have kids who can't effectively communicate, whether it be orally or written. And I start to wonder what could be at the root of this. And I think it boils down to one very simple thing: empathy. And that might sound strange when it comes to communication, but empathy is key in communicating effectively, regardless of the mode of communication that you're using. Because I need to be able to be relatable to my audience, and I cannot do that unless I can empathize with them. So one of the key things that we need to understand is that very often communication fails not because the words that are used are incorrect, but because we have not taken the time to fully empathize and understand one another, because we have not listened intently enough, or we have not listened enough, period. We have not taken the time to fully dive into what the other person might be thinking or feeling. And so empathy is at the core of this. And communication is the root and the heart of everything that I do and everything that I teach, right? So I understand that there are other things that come into play here. But if we're thinking about just developing that skill of being effective in communicating, whether it be through oral or written language, empathy is at its core. I just mentioned the emphasis in the school system on writing and reading and all these things. And one of the things that is at the essence of that curriculum, one of the core skills that are taught within that curriculum, is citing evidence. Yes. And in order to cite evidence, kids are given, or students are given, passages or information that they're going to use as their research, as where the source to pull that evidence from. And then they're given a prompt and they're asked to find evidence within those passages or within that information that they're given in order to complete the writing task. I often noticed, and I noticed this in my own daughters, and I noticed it in the students that I taught, and I noticed it in conversations with people, that they were given the prompt and the passages, and very often the complaint was, but there's nothing in these passages that responds to the prompt. When you looked closely at it, there was. It's just that they were looking for something in the passages that directly, verbatim, addressed the question in the prompt without really being able to think beyond and dissect it and really synthesize and analyze the information and draw from it conclusions that could be inferred or deducted from the information without it being explicitly stated, right? So what is our next skill? The sixth skill is accessing and analyzing information. Now, I was talking to someone the other day and they said, has anybody noticed how these kids who are so tech savvy are tech savvy until they need to find information? Suddenly they don't know how to Google, they don't know how to find anything. And they can use the computer for 1.5 million other things, but when they need to research how to do something, suddenly technology escapes them, right? That's because they are taught that all the information they need is right there in front of them. Again, they're writing these essays, but they're given the passages. They are completing these assignments, but they're given the textbook. Do you remember encyclopedias? I remember my house had a wall covered with encyclopedias, and I was blessed in that sense. My parents really valued learning, and they had all these tools and resources available to me. Well, the truth is that kids have 1 million times more information readily available to them at literally the tip of their fingers, in their phones and their smartphones and their tablets and their computers. But we are not really helping them understand how to access that information and how to digest it and analyze it and break it apart and take from it what they need that is useful to whatever task they're facing. So that is our next task, is trying to figure out how do we teach our kids how to access and analyze information. Now the truth is, if we're honest with ourselves, it's a lot easier, quicker, and less painful when a kid asks a question to just give them the answer. Okay, Mom, how do you spell whatever? Oh, blah, 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 and you spell it out for them. I do the same thing. Let's just be honest. How many of us do that, right? But if we were just patient enough to slow down and say, you know what, look it up, and then come and tell me. Where can you find that information without me having to tell you? What can you type in Google? Or what can you ask Siri or Alexa so that you get the answer that you're looking for? And start taking them through the process of figuring out where to access that information and how to draw from those sources what they actually need. And the final essential skill is curiosity and imagination. It breaks my heart that we have equated things like believing in Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy, and things like, daydreaming about dragons and hearing monsters in the closet, with negative things that we need to quelch, right? And I understand not wanting to lie to your kids. I don't want to lie to my kids either. But we have taken away those sources of imagination and have failed to replace them with new ones. It is essential for any innovation to take place. It is essential for the world to move forward and not become stagnant, that our kids remain somehow filled with curiosity and imagination. They need to ask questions without being given a tablet or a game of some sort or a phone to shut them up. It is imperative that our kids look at the sky and look at the clouds and see shapes and talk about them. It is incredibly necessary that our kids dream of dragons and fairies and impossible things, knowing that they're impossible, but giving themselves permission to dream of those things. Because otherwise, our world is in grave danger of dying from stagnation. My name is Marcia Amaro, and I hope you have enjoyed this conversation. It was a little longer than my usual ones, but I hope you have found value in sticking around and sticking with me. Now, if you have enjoyed this, I invite you to discover my page, marciamaro.com. So head on over right now, and I will share with you on our next conversation some more insights on how to raise confident, enterprising, innovative, resilient, empowered children who are ready to become leaders in their own right.